Hello and Happy New Year. I feel like I should be starting the year off with a more positive video, but today we're going to talk about all of the books I DNF'd in 2024. If you don't know, DNF stands for Did Not Finish. It's any book I picked up, was looking forward to reading, and at some point in reading decided it just wasn't working for me. Either I wasn't enjoying it or it just wasn't really what I expected, and I decided to stop reading it. And I have no intention of picking any of these books up ever again. I read what I read from them. I wasn't enjoying them. I'm done with them now. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad books. They just were not books for me. And then tomorrow I'll talk about all the books I actually did finish. So these are not ranked or anything. They're just the order that I initially read them. The first one is Paradise 1 by David Wellington. This is a sci-fi thriller following a small crew as they embark to this place called Paradise 1, which is a colony that has gone dark for some reason, and they're sent there to figure out what happened there. This I thought was going to be something I would really enjoy, but from the beginning we kind of meet, there's I think 3 human characters on the crew. The ship has an AI that is a character of its own, and then I think there was another like robot or android type of character that at the point I stopped reading I had only very briefly met. So these characters come on the ship. There's not a ton of interaction from the beginning. They sort of just board the ship, get into their pods so that they can be asleep for the journey, and then as they all awaken, something horrible is happening with the ship and they need to figure out what's going on, save themselves so that they can hopefully get to this colony and figure out what's going on there. And I felt like there was a lot of action happening, but also not a lot felt like it was progressing. So it just felt like everything was taking too long, but also there wasn't a lot of time to digest what had happened or had been presented, which feels very contradictory, but that's just how I felt reading it. I felt like we were in the action, in these characters' heads, but also I didn't feel like we really got to know them or how they know each other or anything like that, and I just didn't feel invested in anything that was going on. So if you do like pretty action-heavy sci-fi thrillers, you might enjoy this one more than I did, but writing-wise it just wasn't really working for me. It was just too long. I think it was like 600 pages and the first book in a series, and that was too much of a commitment for something I wasn't feeling very invested in. Next is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller. This is set in the future and it follows a monk who is part of an order of monks that basically collect and preserve any information and knowledge that they come across, and they don't really do anything with it, they just kind of keep it. And the main character that we're following finds something that is deemed to be very important. That's all I remember about it. That's really all that I got to. So I never figured out why this saint is so important, why these relics that they're collecting are so important. If they actually do anything with them, I didn't get the impression that they did, that they just preserved them, but maybe I'm incorrect because I didn't finish reading it. But I just didn't really get what was going on. It felt like not a lot was really happening, and the things that were happening I didn't really feel the significance of. Not that there needs to be big significant things for something to matter in a story, but I didn't feel like the things happening were meaningful in any way. So this is a pretty highly regarded book, but I just didn't get it. The next book is Ringworld by Larry Niven. I got pretty far into this book before I gave up on it. This follows a group of 3 who are tasked with going to investigate a ringworld to see if it poses any type of threat to the people that hired them. We see the relationships and the dynamic between the 3 on the crew develop as things go along. We also see them exploring this ring world and figuring out what it actually is. And for the most part, I thought the story was really interesting, which is why I got so far into it. I think I read at least 2/3 of it before I gave up. And as things were developing, particularly the relationships and just the character choices, and I didn't feel like what they were doing and what was happening were really aligned, and I didn't care what happened to them. The more time I spent with these characters, the less I cared about what happened to them. The more details and information I got about the Ringworld, the less engaged I really felt in exploring it and getting to know more about it, which isn't really what you want from this type of book. You should want to know more, and I just didn't feel that way, so I eventually just gave up. The next book was Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner, and this is a really weird book. It's following multiple storylines, but it also has chapters that are just a series of advertisements and news segments, and that's basically how the world is built up. And then we follow a bunch of different characters doing different things, and it just was too chaotic for me. There's just a lot of disjointed things, and I didn't feel engaged enough in any of it to try and piece it all together or see how things play out. And it all eventually, I'm assuming, comes together to make a complete picture, but just getting all the pieces up front was really not doing anything for me. The next book is Cascade Failure by L.M. Sagas. This is a sci-fi about sort of a ragtag crew, and they respond to a distress signal on an abandoned planet. And I didn't read a ton of this before I DNF'd it. I like the premise of this. I like that general setup that we got, but just the tone of it wasn't really what I wanted at that time. I think I might enjoy this at a different point when I'm more in the mood for that type of story. But to be honest, when I set down a book, I usually don't go back to it. So unfortunately, I probably won't ever pick this up again. But I don't think there was anything really wrong with the story. There wasn't anything that I didn't like. It just, the tone was not really what I was in the mood for. But on the other hand, this is also a space opera, which I've realized or finally accepted is just not something that I like within sci-fi. It's not a subgenre that I've ever been able to really get into. As much as I keep trying them, they just never work out for me. So it might be a good thing that I ended up putting this down, even though I still think the premise and the setup are really interesting. Next book is Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. This is another sci-fi, and it follows a character who is a linguist, and they're trying to decipher these alien messages that they've been receiving. Humanity is at war with some alien race, and they are receiving these bits and pieces of messages that they've been intercepting, and our main character is set on figuring them out and figuring out what the message behind them is to hopefully save humanity. It's a lot about language, a lot about the linguistics of the things that they're picking up. This is one that when I first started reading it, I was very invested in what was happening, and then I think I set it down to finish another book, and when I went back to this, I just didn't care about what was happening at all. I, for some reason, had completely lost any engagement. I don't know if it was just the opening was good and then the bulk of the story wasn't, or if what I was just in the mood for had changed by the time I finished whatever other book I had picked up. But I just completely lost interest in this and then decided to just put it down permanently instead. The next book is Umbrella Academy Hotel Oblivion, which is the third volume in the Umbrella Academy graphic novel series by Gerard Way. I kind of liked the first and second volumes. This is a graphic novel series about a bunch of children who are born under very bizarre circumstances, and a handful of them are adopted by this man and trained to use their superpowers that they each have in basically to make them be superheroes to save the world someday. And I like the premise of this, but I just didn't like the style. It felt very disjointed. Each volume comes together at the end, but as you're going through it, it feels kind of piecemeal, and I didn't really love the art style either. I found some of the characters looked too similar. So I liked the premise of this, but I wasn't really enjoying the stories that much. So by the time I got halfway through this third volume, even though it's the last volume, it probably would have taken me no time at all to finish it. These are pretty quick reads. I just realized I wasn't having fun reading them at all, so I stopped. I think it's a cool concept, but just the writing and the art style weren't working for me. And the last book I have to talk about is Puzzleheart by Jen Reese. This is a middle grade following a main character whose father has a sort of distant relationship with the grandmother, and they end up going as a family to visit this grandmother who owns and operates this puzzle house. And the main character, this child, has always wanted to explore the puzzle house and figure out what it might be hiding inside of it, and is very excited about this trip. And I think it sounds like a really cool concept. Obviously, I'm not a middle grade reader, so it's not that surprising that I wasn't really enjoying this from the beginning. But this read younger than I had expected to. I think the main character is 12, and when I started the book, I would have guessed that the main character was younger. That might just be because I'm removed from this age category, but it just felt, I don't know, some middle grade and young adult I feel like are pretty easy to get into even as an adult reader, and some of them are just too young for me, which is fine. They're not written for me. So again, there's nothing bad about this, and I think it sounds like a really cool plot for a younger reader, but it is definitely written for a much younger than me reader. So those are the 8 books that I DNF'd in 2024, which aren't too many. I thought there would have been more. I feel like I was pretty generously DNFing things last year, but I think that's just because before last year, I never really DNF'd books. If I started a book, I was going to finish it, and I don't feel that way anymore. If I start a book and I'm not having a fun time, I'm not going to finish it. I'm just going to stop reading it, because trying to push through it and hope it gets better usually just slows my reading down, and that's not fun for me. I think reading should be fun, and if I'm not having fun with a book for any reason at all, I no longer have a problem just putting it down and picking something else up that I might have much more fun with. Let me know if you DNF books. I know that can be pretty divisive. Some people are how I used to be and have a really hard time with it. Some people do it constantly, way more than I do. And also let me know if you read and liked any of these books that I ended up not enjoying. Otherwise, that's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.